Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Josh Phegan Digital. The game of market share. No matter what actually happens inside of any market, it's really important that you actually understand the size of the pie. How much of that pie are you actually getting? And if the size of the pie starts to reduce, what are you actually going to do to be able to increase either the size of the pie or to increase the market share inside of the pie that you're looking after? Dean, there's a lot of discussion there about pie. What are your thoughts around market share and why the game of market share is an important game for leaders to be playing?
Thanks, Josh. Look, I think market share is probably one of the more important things that people don't talk about anywhere near enough. I think our industry feels safe if, in fact, we're writing a certain amount of GCI, no matter where that GCI comes from, if that makes sense. And from where I sit, if you're running around and you're selling property across a broad footprint, typically what happens is you're actually out there expending lots of energy, generating a new listing, making that sale. But in that particular marketplace, perhaps nobody knows who the hell you are. And if you're running from one sale to another in that way, then you're not really building any sort of level of impact or scale in that particular market. And so and the other thing about market share is that if the market is going up or down, that's one thing. But if you have a laser beam focus on growing market share in a particular area, that's one thing that you can hold yourself accountable for at all times. So whether it be a region, a suburb, or a bunch of streets inside a suburb, it's important to get really clear about what the available market potential is in your particular region or patch or BDA or whatever you want to call it, right? Call business area or so on. Now, because once you get clear on that and you understand what the possible opportunity is and you say, okay, well, I now need to set some targets around taking a certain amount of share in that marketplace, it helps you get an absolute laser beam focus. And I think with that said, we actually have some clear goals and standards around it. I think is probably the important part because, I could be an agent selling doing $1 million a year, but in the area that I'm actually meant to be looking after and growing my marketing, I might only have 5 or 10% market share, and I might only be doing 30% of my overall volume inside that patch. So what I've learned is that if you can create scale in a particular zone, then people find it hard not to want to use you. So if and I learned many years ago when I was working in a corporate life that, and we've talked about it before in these sessions, Josh, around the circle of influence versus circle of concern, and I sort of liken it to that. If you sort of focus on those things that you can control, the theory is that your influence increases, and it's the same thing when you focus on market share. So if you're focusing on an area, let's just call it a suburb, and let's just take any old suburb, let's call it Mossman. If I'm focusing in Mossman's actually a really big market. The potential market size in Mossman is actually one of the largest in the entire country. I actually think it's actually unachievable for a single agent to actually grow a significant amount of market share in that entire suburb without a significant team or business behind them. I think it's actually even more appropriate when you actually then understand the size of that market to break it down into maybe little segments to say, right, this market's a huge market. How can I actually grow market share in all parts of it, not just in some of it? And so coming back to the whole circle of influence versus circle of concern, if you start off in a particular area and you find that you can get 10, 12, 15, maybe 20% market share in that area, what happens is people in that area, they know you, they get to know you, they see your signboards, they see your scale, you become relevant to them in a way that you wouldn't otherwise because they're receiving information about what's happening in their area based upon your listings and sales and in any of your other activity in the area. Chances are there's also people talking about your dinner and all these other bits and pieces because that you're really active in that zone. If you're making the odd sale here or there in that zone, then you're not relevant at all, right? So there's no one talking about you. You've got no real scale. And effectively, you're basically doing the usual real estate cycle of the boom and bust cycle. Get lots of listings, run out, and unless you're prospecting, your business drops right back down. So if you can get scale or you can get a decent level of market share, 20% plus in any given area, then typically what happens is your business evens out. Those fluctuations, those massive ups and downs even out because you actually start having people come to you. You start start becoming an attraction business, not someone who's got to run around and chase it. So I think, and I've always said, if you look at a patch and you say that patch should produce, 100 sales a year, and you're only doing 5 of them, then there's 95 that you're not doing. And how do you focus into that area so that you can actually grow your share? So as leaders, if you come back to your initial question, as leaders, I think it's massively incumbent upon us to really understand what any area that you operate in, what is the potential of that market, what's your market share, what's your share of sales, and what are you going to do to grow sales? So you need to have a business plan by region, by core business area on how you're going to do that. What's the prospecting activities you're going to put in place? What's the promotional activities? What are you going to do with just listers and just solds? What are you going to do around SEO? So, digital these days, most of the time, Josh, these days, people are coming to you and they've done their research well before you get there. Really, it's yours to lose, I think, these days, because digitally people have already gone and tried to understand when they go, and often it's the Google search, right? And if you're not coming up in that Google search, then, you're potentially not even on the shopping list. So understanding how you're going to create cut through in what is a busy world, and how you're going to sort of have a focus that says, I'm going to make sure that for that particular region, I'm relevant when people want to do something.
So, Dean, it makes me think about a couple of little stories. I was working with this lady who had a phenomenal little business in Golden Bay in New Zealand, and we wanted to write $1 million, and it's going back 10 years ago, and we worked out that she just needed 250% market share. That was the first thing.
Point, right? Because maybe so that's an interesting point, because I often find an agent's income goals and don't correlate necessarily with the turnover of that market. So when you look at it and you say, well, for you to generate that sort of income, and let's assume, because most agents, if we're frank, at best are going to sell 50% of their volume in any given area that they focus on, because they're still going to pick up referrals, and they're still going to pick up, a buyer's property they sold to for someone moving into the area. They're still going to pick up an ancillary and related business. So if you then take that, you then have to say, well, if you were doing 50% or less of your volume inside your marketplace, what income will that give you? And does it match up to what your income goals are? You might need a bigger area, a smaller area, or, you might be able to achieve your income goals by only being at 2 or 3% market share. And in which case you're actually not having a go, or the area is too big, for you to be able to service properly. Because, and they're fundamentals. Things like, if you can't maintain the relationship, so sometimes we think, I need to have a bigger area, and I need to, and often what that means is that they're not actually staying in contact with the people who live in the area. And I say to my team, you need to be thinking about, how do you activate in that marketplace? If there's 1,000 properties, it's a bare minimum. How do we activate 75% of those people in such a way that you have an active relationship with them, that you're relevant, and that you can actually stay in touch with them every 90 days, at least every night. And if you can't do that, potentially the patch is too big.
And so that's about like the building data conversations, the 10-10-20s around a campaign, meeting the neighbours, adding into the database, who's been impacted by what's been listed, what's been sold. And it made me think, I think it was a term that you introduced me to a long time ago, which was TAM, like total addressable market. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, great. So, and I went over to the UK and they go, oh, Josh, this is how many chimney pots I look after. And I'm like, what? And then over here, we go to a number of houses that we look after, same thing. Yeah, but how many properties actually sell every year on a 10-year trend line? Why is a 10-year trend line important in a market? Like, is that something you need to be aware of?
I think when you're looking at market shares, you can't just look at the last year's numbers, right? You've got to look at an average of what the turnover is, what the average sale price, what the average fees are, and all those things. And it actually gives you a sense of what the available market is, and then you know what you need to go after. So if the available market's, $100 million in gross commission, and you work backwards, you can say, well, at 1%, then you need to be writing $1 million inside that area. Yeah, so it's pretty simple math. So it helps you reverse engineer, and I think if you take the law of averages, it means then that you are dealing with real better numbers. And I sort of look at what's been the last sort of handful of years, and what do I think what's going to happen forward. Average it out, and that gives you some sort of numbers to work on. And I think that, and the other thing we try and do is also work on seasonality, to know that if you're looking at over a certain amount of deals over the course of the year, you need to account for the fact that at certain times you're going to sell more and some less. And to keep track of your market share that way.
All the numbers and the stats weren't as advanced, but I used to just look on the major real estate websites and go, out of the last 10 properties that have been loaded in my area, do I at least have one or ideally 2 of them? And if I do, I'm floating somewhere between 10 and 20% market share. So I always just kept on looking on the market share on the listing side. Dean, it's a really important part. Property management market share is also a consideration. Why have a huge sales business and have no PM? And also to understanding, where all the data that's actually sitting inside the business where we should have high penetration. In other words, where do all the landlords live? Where do the archive landlords live? Where are all the past clients of the business? Because, Dean, sometimes you have businesses that are coming to you that have historical trade history, that are, rebranding and moving into that Di Jones environment. You must just walk in there and go, wow, guys, look how much data that you've got, but why do we have a really low market share in that market now? Because things have just slipped or kind of, dropped off over time, and your job is to get back and say, hey, what are the strengths inside of this business now to build significant market share? And what can we be doing to make sure that we still hit our revenue targets?
Josh, there are people, though, that just happen to think that if they're doing the numbers, then it doesn't really matter. But what you find is if the business is not focused in a specific area on market share, it's quite spread out, quite fragmented and quite inefficient. So, not all good business is good business. So if I was giving some advice, though, and we're talking about from a leader's perspective, what can they do? I think you need to have a culture that says market share is important. So you need to measure it. You need to understand what your markets are possible. You need to understand what is your team doing in each of those markets, and you need to review that and assess that on a regular basis. You need to make sure that your agents and your team have a plan for their business development area on how they're going to grow market share. And then also, what are you going to do then to make sure that people are collaborating to refer business to each other? Do you have a culture that is focused on accountability? And what are the tools that you might need to be giving them so that they can actually do a better job in those core business areas to grow their market share against the competition?